Good morning, everyone. Welcome to San Ramon. We're very excited that we have so many registrants, and we hope you enjoy all of the programs. Burling Leong, I met last year in Los Angeles, but I've known of her for many years. As many of you may know, she worked with Ralph Moore, one of my very favorite hybridizers. I must have at least 8 of Ralph's roses, maybe even more, I'm not sure, but I want to talk to Burling later because, of course, I love his Halo series. Ralph loved singles, and so do I, in all shapes, sizes, and colors. But Burling had a wonderful program last year. She's a wonderful speaker. As you can read in the program, she graduated from Fresno State many years ago, and she now has her own rose nursery, and she's helping Texas A&M also with keeping roses alive that are wonderful old roses, and she's also helping Greg Lowry, correct? And so I know you're going to enjoy this program, and afterwards, if you haven't already done so, she brought some of her wonderful own root roses. So please welcome Burling Leong.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. Can everybody hear me in the back? Am I speaking loud enough for everyone? Okay. Good morning, and I hope everybody got their cup of coffee. Since I'm the first speaker, I hope you're not going to nod off on me, and if you do, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder, and we're going to trade places, because I didn't get too much sleep myself. So you're going to be the speaker. So I don't want to see anybody nodding off, okay? Okay, thank you, Joan, for the nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. The theme is Futurama. Now, what is the future of roses? Well, part of my propagation process can perpetuate some of these older roses back into the future. Okay, so I'm going to basically talk about chip budding. Has anybody done any propagation at all, whether through cuttings, grafting, or budding? Raise your hand. Wow, we got a lot of experts here. Good, I could call on you if I have anybody ask a difficult question. I'm going to point every one of you guys out, and you can answer the questions. I'm sure a lot of you are experienced in propagation. As you know, the most popular way and probably the economical way to propagate is rose through cuttings. But unfortunately, some of these roses, through their genetic background, do not have the ability to propagate well through cuttings. That's where chip budding or tea budding or grafting comes in. So I used to do tea budding. Has anybody done tea budding? Raise your hand. Good, okay, anybody has questions on tea budding, the people that raise their hand, they're the one you're gonna ask, because I don't do chip budding anymore, tea budding anymore, because I found that chip budding is a lot easier. And now I do have a handout out by my booth for, it's an outline of when I'm talking about chip budding, because I'm going to be talking quite fast, and because I only have an hour to speak to all of you to keep you guys awake for the next speaker. So I'll be glad to answer questions at my booth, and I actually would demonstrate chip budding. The advantage to chip budding is that you could chip bud at any time, and as long as you have your well-rooted rootstock, and you have some budwood that you want to chip. So you don't have to wait for the bark to slip, like in tea budding. So in turn, you're going to save time. Because there are times when someone sends me a rare rose that need to be budded, but it could be past my regular production time for cutting. So if it's got bud eyes, I will go ahead and bud them and save that material. Because sometimes people send me stuff that their plant is on its last leg, and next year it might be dead, and they won't have any budwood or cuttings to give me. So I would be able to save that rose possibly through chip budding, because I have rootstock always on hand, rooted, ready to chip bud, and that's important. They have a well-rooted rootstock. And I would talk about different types of rootstock in my program. So my program today is about propagation through chip budding. And because of this process, I was able to do some chip budding for some special places, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go on. And if you have any questions, you could ask questions as we go. All right. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, Some rose breeders are breeding towards own root. In my breeding program, that's what I do too, is root roses, hybrid put together parents of roses that will root through cuttings. So I will not put out a rose myself that has to be budded because it's too much labor intensive and you cannot really churn out a lot of roses to put on the market if you have to do a lot of chip budding, okay? Because it takes time because you got to root to rootstock. So all mine have to go through the test of make sure before I put it on the market. I just put a new one out called School Spirit. It's a Floribunda red and yellow stripe. And so I've always tested that and make sure that it propagates real easily through cuttings before I even put out a rose. And of course, all the other criteria we all love, disease resistance, black spot resistant, and mildew and all that, we want to make sure that it's not susceptible to those type of diseases before I put one out on the market. And if I wanted to test a new variety to see if it's going to make a nice tree rose or a weeper or something, you have a new rose that you develop, I do chip budding, so that way I could put it on a rootstock to see how well it grows, whether it's going to weep or not. Before I said, oh yeah, it's a weeper, and then don't weep. Well, I'm not going to say it's a weeper when I had budded it and didn't make a good weeper. Okay. So anyway, there's a lot of advantage to chip budding. Okay? So we're going to talk about that. Now, Gray Pearl is a nice rose, but unfortunately doesn't root on its own. But if you budded, like for instance, this particular one here, on this slide was actually chip budded onto Mr. Moore's Pink Clouds rootstock. It was so vigorous that I had to prune it out of the pathway. So that was pretty good. So this is a good example. Okay. Now, if you decided to do some chip budding yourself, you have these three rootstock I use: Dr. Huey, Fortuniana, and Pink Clouds. So for Dr. Huey and Fortuniana, I would recommend if you're going to bud hybrid teas and Floribundas, because they have ability to size up. That means to accept the size of the bud eye. For smaller roses like miniatures and polyanthus, Pink Clouds really does well because they more or less send out straight rootstock. I have some on my booth that you could actually see some Pink Clouds that I have, that why the size diameter would be more suitable for polyanthus and miniatures because the eyes are small. Now here's some Dr. Huey rootstock that I received from Weeks from the first batch that I had to bud for a particular castle here in California. And so they're 4-foot whips that were rooted in the mist and then transplanted into gallons. So when you're rooting for tree roses, the smallest size you should start getting root system is these 1-gallon containers. Now for bush-sized roses, I got these for anybody who's interested. UC Davis has a virus index program for plant stock, and I think it's $25. And if you guys want to decide to root some of your own rootstock, I think they have maybe 8 different rootstocks they have available you can order, and I think the minimum order is $25. And they come in these little whips like this. They're 8 inches, but you have to DI and take the bottom eyes off and take the thorns off, and then root them yourself. And I think they're about 40 cents a stick. And this is Dr. Huey. As you can see, they're pretty good size. Oops, sorry. Right here, they're pretty good size where they're bigger, so they accommodate Floribundas and the hybrid tea bud eyes. So once you get your rootstock, this is like a 48-inch Dr. Huey rootstock, well rooted. And all I have to do is cut it at a 45-degree angle, so with a sharp knife and a steady hand. That's important. You have to have a sharp knife, but also a steady hand. And so you put it at a 45-degree angle, and then you make this cut, and you put this little flap here. The reason why chip budding is so easy, that whatever mistakes you make, you can correct it right then and there. If you have a bud eye that's too small or too big, the bud eye is too big, that overlaps the cambium layer, you just look for another bud eye that would fit that cut you have on that particular rootstock. So everything could be corrected before you wrap it. So your success rate will be a lot better. Okay. Now this is how you collect your bud eyes. So if every one of you wants to ever try chip budding or tea budding, neither way, your collection of bud eyes is very important. You always walk out, with a moist paper towel, whether your rose bushes, your favorite rose bush is out, apparently out in your yard or on your patio. And it's important you have that paper towel moist, because when you cut these bud eyes, this is the stage you want to get them. Nice and plump, but not leafed out. And then you wrap them right away in the moist paper towel, and hopefully, you remember to label the bud eyes. Because sometimes you would collect 5 different varieties. Oh, which one is which? Because, then there are some leaves. You take the leaves off. Oh, gosh, which one is which? And I've done that. I've done that before, and then you wonder, and I have to wait until actually they bloom, and then, oh, yeah, okay, then you label it. So, there's all these little things. Now, this is a bud eyes that you don't want to collect. See, this one's already started leafing out, and those are too mature, too old to collect. And this is more or less what you want to get that stage at. Okay. So then you're going to remove it with your sharp knife and using a steady hand. You're going to kind of almost the same angle that you cut that, the chip cut on that rootstock, you're going to do the same. And what you're basically doing is like skin grafting. Whatever amount of wood you took off, you're going to replace. And you're going to match the cambium layer. And you're going to slide it underneath this flap here. And that's going to hold that bud eye. And you're going to use the extra length that you cut there, which I would demonstrate this at my booth, so that way you can actually see what I'm talking about, because it's kind of hard to really describe it. And anyway, when you cut that, you use that extra flap, and then you slide it under there, and then you can cut off and match that cut. And then cambium layer is all matched. So the amount of bark you took off originally, you're just going to replace. It's skin grafting, basically. So, and then once you get that all situated in there, then you're going to wrap it. I wrap it with parafilm, and I go from the top and wrap. And as you're wrapping from the top, you're actually putting pressure and making this lay flat up against the cambium layer. And if you see when you're wrapping that you accidentally move this bud eye to the side and the cambium layer is not matching, well, you can see all these mistakes. You see what you're doing. You just slide it back with your hand, your finger, and then line it up and then wrap it.
Burling, do you ever do more than one on one rootstock?
You mean more than one variety?
Yeah.
Or 2 or 3 eyes?
Just more than one bud eye.
Oh, yes. Yes. Can you repeat the question, please? Oh, the question was, do I actually chip bud more than one eye on one rootstock? And I said yes. Especially when I do tree roses, I put at least 3. 3 eyes, because it makes a nice round tree head. Matter of fact, it was Joan was at the ARS conference in Los Angeles last year, and I had a pink clouds whip that I ran out, so we were all demonstrating, and I kept butting up and down that rootstock to show people. And I brought it was Cinderella, and I brought the tree from last year, October 14th, when we did it. So to see the example, and it's there, and all 8 eyes took on that tree. And so I have it on the table, and I'll show you, and they're all bloop, 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 growing. So that was the result. So it's not fake. And I thought I'd do that last year to show for this year what it looked like and the success rate that it had. Of course, Cinderella bud's easy, so it makes me look good. But that's beside the point. But I brought it here so everybody could see, and that was a year's growth, and it wasn't even in the greenhouse. If I had forcing it in greenhouse, it would be a lot bigger, the heads. But you could see it out there. Okay. And the beauty about parafilm is that it will naturally crack. You don't have to do anything else once you wrap it, because you want to seal the cuts so air doesn't get into it and dry out the bud eye. So you could see it cracking. And then, of course, when it started leafing out, you could start patting yourself on the back because it's growing, right? Otherwise than that, if it didn't take, after 2 or 3 weeks, you could see the eye, it turns black. And then, unfortunately, it didn't take. So these are the 3 stages that I've started to do some chip budding for this particular castle here in California. And these are the 3 stages Now this was Dr. Huey. See that little bud eye? That was one of hybrid teas that I have budded. And this is Dr. Huey rootstock still growing. And this is the stage. You want to keep that Dr. Huey going, to keep that sap flowing, to keep that eye alive until it's knitted. Okay, second stage. This is Dr. Huey right here. Still hasn't been cut off yet. See how these hybrid tea eyes are really pushing out? The parafilm's cracked and it's really on its way. Then for sure, that's when you're going to cut off. As you can see, these are the 2 eyes left, and then this has been cut off. So the Dr. Huey growth is off there, and now all the growth is going to be devoted to those 2 eyes. And that's when it's going to really push, and the roots will feed those 2 eyes and start really going to get it going. If you do not eliminate that Dr. Huey, what it's going to do is, just because Dr. Huey's vigorous, it's going to dominate and take all over the growth, and then these would, just kind of hang there, and this will be growing like crazy. And so cut that off once it gets to this stage, and then you're on your way. And then, of course, you just pinch here to keep it trained and make a nice head. Yes, ma'am?
How many bud eyes do you allow on Dr. Huey?
I usually, when I do tree roses, I bud like 3. But if I was just going to do a bush, I do 2. But for a tree rose, I try to do at least 3.
Yeah, but I mean, Dr. Huey bud eyes.
I thought you meant these eyes here. No, you mean the Dr. Huey? At least 1 or 2.
1 or 2?
Yeah. To keep it going? I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, anybody else have any questions before I move on? Yes.
Do you ever take off the rest of that Dr. Huey down closer to the new bud eye?
Right here?
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of leave it a little bit tall, because if it start dying back just a little bit, then I have room to cut it off. Sometimes, it dies back. But most of the time, if it's a vigorous, it just takes over and it hardly ever dies back. But once in a while, it all depends, if you're in the winter time and got a lot too much moisture, it can get some fungus. Yes, just straight across. No, I don't, but I imagine if you wanted to, you probably can. So if there's any moisture, it'll just drain off instead of sitting on the top. I haven't tried, but that's a good idea, Ruth. I might have to try that. Let's see. Did anybody hear her question, what she asked? She asked, when I cut the Dr. Huey off, I just do a blunt cut straight across, flat. Rose suggested that I went and cut it at an angle, which is probably a good idea, because if there's any rain or moisture, if it's outside, if you have a mist system, overhead watering, water would sit right on top of here and stay on that cut, and might have a possibility, if you have fungus, to have it start dying back. Now, if it was cut at an angle, very good, Rose, I appreciate that. I'm going to try it and see what's the difference. The water would drain off a lot easier instead of sitting on top. So that does make a lot of sense.
But we're always taught, whenever we cut a branch, to cut at an angle with the high point over the bud. Maybe it would be the same there.
Yeah. Imagine it probably would be better. It probably would be better. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. So the water would drain off if there's any overhead watering or rain or anything. Yeah, okay. That was a good point. Okay, for chip budding, when you do this, you're able to save some rare roses from extinction. You never know, some botanical rose garden says my plant has been there for over 100 years. Nobody else has it commercially available. And when you know how to do chip budding, you can help some of these public rose gardens maintain their, heirloom part of their garden. And that's one of the things that I do. And I like to help out, like the Brooklyn Botanical Rose Garden. They've been sending me material. Some of the roses are dying off or this and that. So I work together with some of these public rose gardens. So that's one of the highlights of what I love to do about what I do on propagation. So I've been getting from Rare Ramblers from Ann Beltovich. I don't know, is she here, Ann? Anyway, Ann Beltovich has a large collection of ramblers. So Sarah Owens of the Brooklyn Botanical Rose Garden is trying to get some of her rare collection back in, and Ann has it. So it's going from, Ann has some, and Sarah has some in Brooklyn. So there's like a triangle from Washington to New York, back to California, back to New York and Ann. So it's a triangle going back and forth and sending material and getting some of these rare roses back together. And so I think it's kind of neat from coast to coast and be able to do this type of work. So you could say, like I mentioned, rare roses from extinction. You can learn the skill. Okay? And I'm sure some of you probably might have practiced it, and it's easy. You just take a little time, but you can be able to propagate some of your own roses. You could share this skill with others, and that's what I'm doing today. I'm sharing this knowledge to you and this skill so everybody could have the opportunity to pick it up and learn it. And then you could use this to propagate other special plants. So it's not just roses. You could do this, whatever tea budding's been used, whether it's a fruit tree, citrus trees, a loquat tree. That's what, that's the thing about learning a new skill. You want to start practicing on other things. It's just like when you learn how to propagate cuttings, you don't stick to roses. Oh, you go somewhere and you go, oh, look at that plant. Oh, I like to have a copy of that plant. So you get a little cutting, you take it home and try to root it. Same way with budding. I go crazy. I says, ooh, maybe I could bud this or propagate this and do other things, and propagate fruit trees and citrus. So I practice on other things and it works. So it's kind of neat to be able to do things like that. So this particular place that I've started doing this chip budding for, that I'm really proud of doing, happens to oversee San Simeon over in California. And the place has this beautiful view and also has a nice pool. Yeah, a beautiful pool. Yes. This is where the chip budding I started doing. I worked for Ralph Moore for many, many years, and my thing was chip budding miniature tree roses. And miniatures are small. Even if you ever tried Bud C, the smallest, tiniest little rose in the world, the best time to get budwood from C is in the winter, because most of the time in the spring and summer it's always growing, and the material that you need for budwood is real tender, and you cannot get the bud eyes off. So the only time I could bud C is the dead of winter, because it's hard off, and that's where I could get my little tiny bud eye and put my glasses on, and I could bud C. So normally you would not be able to bud it if you were doing tea bud, because you need that rootstock to slip. With chip budding, you don't. So long as you have a well-rooted rootstock, like pink clouds, which is, you could get them skinny little rootstock would accommodate those tiny little C eyes. I put my glasses on, and then I could bud C in the wintertime. And then they'll set and they'll knit it in. And then in spring, when the weather picks up, it's all healed in. And then boom, when the weather picks up, it'll start growing. So, but otherwise than that, I cannot bud C in the spring or in the summer because it's too vigorous. Okay, so some of these hard to propagate roses that you normally can propagate through cuttings, which C is easy to propagate through cuttings. But if you want to make a tree rose, you need to bud it in the wintertime. And the only time you can do that is through chip budding, because the rootstock doesn't have to slip. So that's an example why chip budding can be an advantage. You're going to save time. Okay. For the chip budding, like I mentioned, I was used to just budding miniatures. Well, that was when I was younger, but now I need glasses. And thank God, for Dr. Huey is bigger, and I'm chip budding floribundas and hybrid teas. The eyes are bigger, so I don't need my glasses now. So that helps. So anyway, for this chip budding method, I was handed, I'm sure some of you attended some of my programs before. For some of you, this is new. Bear with me. The question was, how did I got involved with doing this project to begin with? Well, Greg Lowry, that owns Vintage Gardens, worked with one of the groundskeeper that's in charge of restoring Hearst Castle. They were exchanging rose bushes to restore in bush form at Hearst Castle, but they decided they want tree roses because Randolph Hearst liked tree roses, the standards, because he was a rather tall man. I have never met him myself, so I don't know, but he didn't want to bend down, to smell the roses, so he wanted them a little bit higher so he didn't have to really bend down. So he liked the standard tree roses that budded at 36 inches, 3 foot. So that's when Christine Takahashi asked Greg, do you know of anybody that would do chip budding? And of course, other people were doing tea budding, and Weeks and some of the big rose growers would not want to tackle, a project that only want one tree rose of this, one tree rose of that. They're in massive production. They want to do, thousands of this and thousands of that. So Greg knew me at Sequoia, and so he suggested I contact Sequoia Nursery and asked if we were able to take on this project, because they want to restore the rose garden at Hearst Castle back when Randolph Hearst was alive. So any rose going back in there now has to be 1949 and older, and so that's, he was the last, I think the last time he was there was 1952, when he was no longer there at the castle. So there was a time era that all these roses got to go back there, had to be in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Fortunately, they found all the receipts that Randolph Hearst had kept of all the nurseries that he bought roses from, so they went down the list. They send me this list and says, do you have any of these? And at the time, Carolyn Superinger started some heirloom roses, collection of heirloom roses, and of course I already said yes, right? Because what a wonderful project to get involved in. They helped restore this historical castle back in its heyday. And of course I said, yeah, we'll do it. And then I turned to Caroline, well, Caroline, how many roses do we have on this list? About 23, you know, they wanted like close to 80 or 100 on the list. And some of these are no longer in production. So that was hard to find. So we had the task of looking if we could locate all these roses. So we went online and contact people, and especially some of these heritage rose gardens, like Greg Lowry had a big collection of them. San Jose Heritage Rose Garden had a big collection of some of these old roses. So we were able to get some budwood. Mel Holtz, when I went to the San Jose Heritage Rose Garden, he spent a day with me, and some of you know Mel. And he was so gracious to help, get the budwood, and so I could take it back to my place, you know, and bud these tree roses. And then Greg would send the budwood to me, and then we'd get them started. So that was important. I had to get the rootstock ready, because I never know any time when somebody said, yeah, I do have that rose, send it to me, and then my rootstock is there. Because I could do chip budding, you could do it any time. As soon as I got the budwood, I could go ahead and chip bud. And because of that, I was able to do this and get the first batch in for the, I don't know if anyone went there in April of 2008. We have a few people I recognize that went there. And that was the first batch that went in. I delivered them in January. And during April, they were planted in January, so they were ready for this, this group conference, the Heritage Rose Conference in 2008. This is Christine Takahashi here. She's the head lady that's in charge, and I deal with and talk about what she wants. And so we work closely together on what varieties. And to this day so far, I think I delivered about 150 tree roses. I drove them from Visalia myself in a U-Haul or a big truck, drove them in the dead of winter in January when it was foggy, and drove them out there because that's when they have the time to transplant them. Of course, when they're dormant is the best time to transplant. So they're doing it in stages because they don't want to rip out everything all at once and leave too many bare areas. So when they're ready from me, that's when they prepared and do certain sections of the castle. And so far, I think 150 tree roses and about 200 rose bushes that I propagate were delivered throughout the years. And then I have 100, I think I have 85 more tree roses they want, and I'm working on that. And some more rose bushes. And so it's a constant thing. Hearst Castle, it's not a tiny garden, so we're doing it in sections. And I can't do it all at once anyway, so it works out perfect. So this is some of the pictures of that time. Now, they have a wonderful crew. I went up there last year, and they are all enthused about wanting to learn chip budding. So we were inside this greenhouse. Randolph Hearst really loved plants, and he had 5 of these metal greenhouses built on the property. And they restored 2 of them, and it's a really nice, well-built greenhouse. So they restored 2 of them, and the crew brings in some things, and they push things to plant around, you know, bedding plants or whatever, they hold them in there. So I had a little chip budding demonstration for them, and they were really enthused. But this group of people are really super nice and hardworking people that really keep that place going. So anyway, here's some of the roses that were budded at that time. So they're being placed around the castle.
How long do you keep the stakes on them?
When I deliver them with bamboo stakes, and then they put these look like 2x2 stakes in there. And they keep them, because sometimes the wind blows pretty high up there, because they told me they lost a few that the wind just came in and just whip them. I suggest on the real young tender ones that you know, maybe I just delivered and are not real well established, to go up a little bit higher on the stake and tie in some of the main branches, because the wind up there just whips them and just breaks them off. You know, it gets pretty windy up there. Excuse me? This one in particular, it might be General MacArthur. I'm not quite sure.
How tall are the standards?
They're budded at 3 feet. As you can see they have climbers going up in their tall palm trees. It's pretty neat. And I have a few of the roses here. I'm not going to go through, I've eliminated some of them, but going to keep some of them here that, that reflects the time and era of what's going on at that time when he was alive. Some of these are still available commercially and some aren't.
Did you keep any of the bud stock so you can continue to sell these?
Yeah, I do. I have the whole collection at my place. Just in case one of the tree roses break off, you know, they need another one. That happens sometimes, as we all know. This is one of my favorite hybrid teas as far as for a hybrid tea in that time, as you know, when they did the breeding in those times, it didn't matter whether they root on their own because they knew they're going to bud anyway. So they didn't, the breeders in those times didn't know, you know, wasn't breeding for own root. They were breeding for a beautiful rose and they're going to tea bud anyway, so it didn't matter. When I got this collection, I find that when I propagate through cuttings, I begin to find out which one do root easily through cuttings. This one does, and this one repeats bloom this is a very vigorous plant. It does well on its own root. So there I'm beginning to find out. And then some definitely has to just be budded. This one in particular has to be budded. And then they're going to do weepers. And this one here, this particular polyantha is a beautiful weeper, and it was blooming when I went there. It was the last rose that was still blooming. And this blooms really well in cool weather. So they want, oh gosh, I got an order for like 10 tree roses of this. They're going to do in weepers. And of course they put in polyanthas in too, along with their, you know, bedding plant type things, so they're incorporating some polyanthas. This General MacArthur is a rose that I'm got 8 going. It's going to anybody from LA area? There's called Townsend House. Are you familiar with Townsend House? It's a historical house. A landscaper is wanting to restore that Townsend House, and so they want 8 General MacArthur and 8 Los Angeles. Los Angeles has to be budded, so I'm budding that in bush form. So I go down lower, and then British Queen to be planted over at the Townsend House. So that's another project I'm working on. So you see some polyanthas along with hybrid teas for abundas to go in. So we're going to have a wide range of different type of roses planted at Hearst Castle. Los Angeles, it has to be budded. This one is commercially available. These are some of these, I think that's Climbing Caesar Brunner, and I'm not quite sure which one this one is, but they climbing right up on these palm trees. This pink Gros Alcan makes a beautiful tree rose. It's just gorgeous. And there's some of these weepers that's Phyllis Bide that they wanted. Those weepers. Towns and places in California. So, in summary, chip budding can and will be able to save red roses from extinction. And you can learn the skill. You can share the skill with others. And then use to propagate other special plants. Here's a golden loquat tree that my Uncle George is this huge loquat, and he had these growing, and he told me that to stunt this, you bud it on quince apple. So this is an example, like I mentioned earlier, when you start budding or propagating, you branch out into other things, and I says, okay, I'm going to try it. So I got some quince apple, rooted that as my rootstock, and then I chip budded this quince apple, this loquat, golden loquat, onto this quince, and this is my loquat tree planted on my place. So, yes?
These earlier roses, first half of the century, how do they compare to today's disease resistancy? Because they didn't care in those days about disease resistance. Do you find that they're more disease than?
No, matter of fact, they're just as disease resistant as some of these modern roses, and a lot of them have fragrance. Yeah, I'm just amazed at some of the, because now I have, like Joan mentioned, I keep some of the rootstock. They were budded on, when I got some material, the extra material that I had, when I finished budding the tree rose, I saved it and budded it into a bush form and onto to Pink Cloud's rootstock, and I have them in 5-gallon containers, and they're just really nice bushy plants and hardy, and a lot of them are disease resistant. Yeah, no, So the breeders were doing a good job then at that time looking for disease resistance too. But some of them just don't have the ability to root on their own. Yeah. But anyway, and here's another example here. My brother, he knows how to graft walnut trees, and I told him about the chip budding, and we love this green gauge plum. Are you familiar with green gauge plum? It's one of the old plums. It was used as a pollinizer right in the middle of a regular plum. Dr. Byrne probably knows this, right, Dr. Byrne, that some fruit trees need to have another variety to cross-pollinate, to be able to produce fruit, and that's what they do in plum orchards. They'll have a pollinizer, and it's green gauge. So if you ever go to an orchard that has plums and you all of a sudden see one totally different variety, it's not a sport or anything, it was purposely budded because it blooms at the right time for that particular plum to be cross-pollinated, produce fruit. So the green gauge, I've always loved green gauge plums. And so we have our next door neighbor has plum trees, and we noticed he had the green gauge budded right in the middle. So he went and got a budwood, and he chip budded onto his regular plum tree. I think it's an early Santa Rosa or something. And and there it is. And this has been cut off. This little notch here was like an early Santa Rosa plum. And so it just grew, and it's just growing like crazy. So you could do, other type of plants too, and trees. Okay. Now, I budded, when you start budding, you be a little bit more creative. So I budded on my place, some of you who've been there, I budded Cinderella on a tall stem. And this is another thing, you start getting creative. How many can I bud on that thing, Cinderella buds well, so I got a big, tall rootstock of pink clouds, like 6 foot, and I did a topiary, 3 heads, boom, boom, boom. Well, these little birds decided they like my little Cinderella topiary, so it was like a 3-story hotel for them. So they got the bottom layer, and then the middle, and then the top. They chose the second head to make their little nest, and there they are. So they were smart enough to not go on the bottom because the cats could get to them. So they went to the second one, and the third one was a little canopy so the hawks and stuff don't get them. So and there's my little bird nest. So you can create your own environmentally green burn house. If everybody grew Cinderella, that is a very bushy plant and can support these little birds. So I thought that was so cute. So when I saw that, I had to take a picture when they were born and then chirping there. So that's what you can do. Not only chip budding, you can build little green birdhouses on your topiaries. So anyway, that's my program. If anybody has questions, I don't want to take away any time from the next speaker. I'll be out there on my booth, and I'll demonstrate chip budding. Okay? Oh, I still have time. Okay, so is there any questions here? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Beneficial insects like praying mantis and bees and things like that. So I hardly ever spray. Most of them are disease resistant. Cold-hardiness? I can't say because I don't live in Chicago or back east anywhere, but they do in Tulare County where I'm located at. It could get down to 28. And as long as they're well rooted, they'll be fine. Frost might just tip them off a little bit, but if you got a strong root system, you know, you just, in the spring, you cut back whatever part that might have died back due to frostbite, and that root system will keep that thing going, and it'll just regrow in the spring. So I'm only speaking for Tulare County. Did anybody else answer her question, the lady here, about roses being frost hardy or an example? No? Hi. Okay, do they actually die back, Rosemary? Yes. All the way down? I mean, they don't come back at all? Oh, some have died back, but most of them come back. She said most of them do come back. Do you do mulching or protection of any kind? We always have mulching. Okay. Okay, you mulch it up to where you've been over the whole plant or no? About 4 inches. 4 inches of mulch on around the bottom of the root system, more or less, is what you're protecting? Oh, okay, okay. Did that answer your question? I'm glad we have a room full of experts here. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mulching is the key. Okay. Okay. And I know Muriel, is she in here? I thought I saw her come. Muriel, yeah, there she is. She knows about mulching. Yeah, if you want to talk about mulching, she'll be glad to answer your questions, because I know she has some unique techniques. I think at one time you put, was it shavings over? Shavings. You could buy the shavings like for, you know, pets and horse stalls and stuff. Uh-huh. Shavings. A lot of things, people could use cardboard. I know newspaper is a good insulator. Wood chips is good for mulching and insulating. Does anybody else have any questions? How much more time, Joan, do I have? Okay. Anyway, anybody else have any more questions? Yes. Okay, to restock my propagation media, what I use is peat moss and pretty much all depends on the year, but actually it's about 3/4 perlite and 1/4 of the peat. Now you could fine tune it a little bit if you're in a real hot area, you want to retain a little bit more moisture. I root everything in my mist system. So I have a mist system inside a greenhouse. But so things might be a little bit different for you if you don't have the type of propagation, but I'm just telling you what I use. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, as you know, the theme is Futurama of Roses. Okay, ironically, I have 2 UC students from down in Los Angeles wants to interview me this coming Saturday, October 6th, and are doing a documentary on the rose industry. They want to know what's the trend, what's going on, and things, you know, how is it perpetuating? They want to learn everything from breeding to propagation and how to market a rose and things like that, so doing documentary. So I'm going to encourage them that the rose industry is you know, of course, it's based on construction a lot. But right now, I think what's hot is the landscape roses. I mean, before I used to go through a drive-through like In-N-Out, or I see those roses planted there. I mean, they're not hybrid teas, they're shrub roses, they're landscape roses. I go to, I'm telling you, I do frequent some of these fast food places. So, you know, and I drive through the drive-through, and there's these roses that are planted there, and it's good to see. You go to McDonald's, you see roses planted there. So they are right there. We're all in a fast food era, so you get these young people, you get all kinds of groups and people and diverse people going through, drive through these fast food places. They're looking at roses, so subconsciously looking at roses, but they're seeing landscape roses, and right now that's what's hot, is landscape roses. And they are being exposed to these roses. They're looking. So if we got hardy roses, easy to grow. That's all we want. Nobody wants to spray anymore. Who has time, right? And when to pollute their environment, we're more eco-friendly. We don't want to pollute our water that we drink or the air we breathe. So as breeders, we are responsible to maintain roses that will perpetuate through the future. We got to keep our costs low, because I'm talking about a rose grower in the business. And well, I'm always looking to recycle things, recycle pots, recycle the soil. Now some of you say, well, don't recycle the soil if the rose is dead, because it might have some disease. But you know, I use that. You just lay it out in the sun, let the sun sterilize it or whatever. If you want to, spray it with a little bit of fungicide and kill it. But reuse that soil. You can reuse it I transplant it. I just save it and transplant it to bigger roses established, and when I bump them up into a 5-gallon, I got some in 2 gallons. Well, that soil, that plant already has an established root system. It can withstand whatever little bit disease you might have in a soil. It's not going to kill it. When you got a hardy variety, it will withstand it. You got a root system. So I transplant, and I don't throw it away. I just transplant it into a 5-gallon, and I never, had any problems. So I do try to transplant. My greenhouses, some of you have been to my nursery. It's it's nothing fancy. I don't have fancy Dutch greenhouses, multi-million-dollar greenhouses. I use recycled material. It's arched cables that they were going to take to the dump, perfectly arched, arched already, and there are cables that they were going to take to the dump, the cable company. So I was lucky to find that and use it. So I recycle my pots, recycle my soil, and right now I'm writing labels that a nursery was going to throw away, and I just get a marker and scratch out the back, and I reuse the labels. They're nice and thick. It's hard to find those labels anymore. They make them so thin you poke it in and practically bend over. So I recycle as much as I possibly can. And so what I'm going to say to these students about the future of roses is that as breeders, we are responsible to environmentally conscious to get roses that are disease resistant, so we don't have to go and spray and pollute our air and water and things like that. And I'm going to say that roses can be used. And I think roses have stages in life. What's popular here might not be as popular. Remember, Margot Coster was so popular, you see it everywhere. Now you don't already see Margot Coster. There are trends. And then color. What's popular? What's good color? Pink is popular one year, and all of a sudden, odd colors, like tawny tiger and stripes and things like that. So, which is fine. Everybody likes a little bit of variety and things. So, but the main thing for us to remember is, as for me as a business owner, I want to propagate roses that's going to easily propagate through cuttings. If it gets a good root system, like I've always said, it's like a human. Our heart system is you got a strong heart, you can resist a lot of things, right? Disease, colds, and things like that. You bounce back from surgery or whatever, it's your heart. To me, the rose, you got a strong root system, it's going to withstand overwatering, a little bit of over-fertilizing, it will bounce back, okay? But I have to admit, I have killed some things, overwatering and fertilizer, but if it's got a good root system, maybe it could withstand some of this. So I'm going to say for the future, I think there's always room for heirloom roses, because I think every rose has a room in somebody's garden, where there's a rambler looking for a rambler, a tree rose, polyantha. We all have different tastes, and we all have different landscape themes. So there's room for heirloom roses, modern roses, hybrid teas, or whatever. Because, we see some of these roses. Today's roses is going to be tomorrow's heirloom roses. And it's amazing when I look at some of the dates of some of these roses that I do carry. Back in the 1800s, 1849, oh my God. It's wonderful, because these roses, they're a reflection of not only beauty, but time and history. And the roses you see, Amelia Earhart, General MacArthur, Will Rogers. I mean, it reflects the people, the movers and shakers, or whatever they were doing at that time. Places, Santa Anita, San Fernando, Columbia. I mean, it's neat. You see these, and you go, okay, you associate. Columbia, Rosemary and Ron, they live up there. Some of you people in LA, Santa Anita, you might be horse fans. San Fernando, your valley. So it's a reflection of time and history. And it's wonderful. So I embrace all these roses. I embrace miniatures. I embrace polyanthas. I embrace old, new roses. But the most important thing, I need to embrace that they're easy to propagate and disease resistant. Because makes me happy that I have a customer that I'm going to send a rose to and that they're going to be happy. And so I want my complaint department down so I don't have to deal with complaints and have to send them a new rose or refund their money. So as on that aspect, I really say thank you for being here and taking the time to listen to me. And I really enjoy restoring the castle and Brooklyn and Townsend House, and I think I'm going to work with Rancho Los Alamitos Garden, so I have other projects that people want me to help with some of these public rose gardens, and so generations and generations can enjoy these roses, old or new or whatever. They're roses, they're beautiful, and we all need to take the time to smell rose, right? Okay. Thank you.